Okay, chapter 4 is about the social emotional development in the first 2 years of life. And we'll look in three parts: the personality development, the social influences, and the emotional development. First part, personality. Let's discuss the early personality development using the psychodynamic approach. So it's going to be the Erikson work. Talk about temperament and temperamental differences. So the psychodynamic perspective comes originally from Sigmund Freud, and it was really developed significantly with Erik Erikson's work on infant development. Freud's the one that came up with the oral and anal stage and the term fixation. And Erikson came up with the 8 stages. The first 2 stages are what are relevant here, because the first stage for Erikson is the trust versus mistrust. And the second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And we talked about Erikson's 8 stages in chapter 1 to give the background for this. So you can always go review those 8 stages, or simply realize that the first year is trust, the second year is autonomy. So Freud's psychodynamic perspective, Freud has certain assumptions. Freud believed that individuals are passive agents, and that personalities are driven by an unconscious conflict between the biology of survival and societal rules. The 2 stages that Freud named in terms of development in the first 2 years are the oral stage and the anal stage. And Freud claims that these are stages where the libidinal energy is focused. In other words, the erogenous zone of the body is focused in this area. The libido is centered in the mouth during the oral stage. And again, this is Freud's theories. And this is referring to the desire for oral stimulation by the baby, and the infant satisfies that desire by nursing or putting other objects such as toys or a thumb into their mouth. And Freud believed this gave rise to the id part of personality. Now, I will point out that more neuroscientists tend to look at the mouth as being, because of its high sensitivity. In other words, your mouth is really good at determining the actual shape and touch and feel of an object. A number of neuroscientists actually view that the mouth, the reason why babies put things in their mouth, is to explore what they are. Our hands are also good at determining the shapes of things, and so is our eyes. But you remember that we talked about in the last chapter that infants' visual systems, they're really nearsighted. So it makes sense that they would find other ways to explore something. And so one of the more experimental understandings of why the children put stuff in their mouth is that they are exploring it with all the sensory systems that they have. Freud interpreted this differently. He said that it gave, it's a desire for oral stimulation. Freud's perspective was strongly countered in the years after his dominance in psychology. And so I just want to point out that experimental data don't exist for that argument. Freud's talk about the anal stage is that the libido migrates to the anal stage during the anal stage there's a focus on toilet training, and the infant masters the challenge of delaying immediate gratification of the desire for moving their bowels. And this gives rise, according to Freud, to the ego part of personality. The ego being for Freud was the controlling arbitrator for the person. Freud came up with the term fixation, and what challenges during the oral and or anal stages can lead to later personality issues. So overstimulation or understimulation can lead to what he called a fixation. And an oral fixation, is a return to the oral stage in later life, shown by habits like smoking or gum chewing or continuing to suck one's thumb, or as a result of too much or too little gratification during the oral stage. And the anal fixation, he believed, was a return to the anal stage later in life, and it's shown through obsessive personality issues, like a result of too much or too little gratification during the anal stage. So let's look at what Erikson's thoughts on this is. And so Erikson's ideas were to focus on social context to de-emphasize sex, especially for a 1-year-old. And his focus was that the early development was acutely influenced by the infant's social context. The first 2 stages of development for Erikson are trust in the first year and autonomy in the second year. And remember, Erikson always has things as a, if not this, then what? And so with trust, if a child doesn't learn trust in that first year, they have mistrust. If they don't learn autonomy in the second year, they have shame and doubt. And so Erikson believed that we must resolve previous stages before we can progress successfully to the next one. So trust versus mistrust is the first stage of psychosocial development, and the primary task is to develop a sense of trust in the caregiver, in themselves, and in the world around them. So trust develops when caregivers respond to the baby's needs consistently and competently. The second year, in the second stage, is autonomy, and that's versus shame and doubt, and the infant begins to understand self-control through key accomplishments. Trusting infants are more comfortable in attempting toilet training. Mistrusting infants experience shame and doubt about toilet training. So as you can see, Erikson kind of turned this dramatically around to say, no, it's not a sexual thing for an infant. It's simply learning trust and then learning autonomy. Now, children have a temperament, and temperament is the biologically based individual differences on how one responds to the environment that influences their emotions, their physical level, and their attention. And this is dynamic. It means it changes, and it goes across one's lifespan, and it allows for developmental changes. In a couple studies in terms of temperament, there was the New York longitudinal study dimensions, and then the revised list was done by Rothbard in the dimensions there. And we'll see this over the next couple slides. The longitudinal study looked at adaptability. Does the child adjust to novelty, quality of mood, distractibility? And Rothbard's revised list had talked about negative affectivity, which would be the fear and frustration, as well as extroversion, insurgency, and that is the low shyness, high intensity pleasure. The next page of this is for the New York list. It's the activity level. Is the child physically active, and thresholds of responses and approach and withdrawal. Does the child want to go toward new situations or avoid them? And Rothbard's revised list includes effortful control. Effortful control, the inhibitory control, the attention control, low intensity pleasure, and perceptual sensitivity. For temperament, we now feel that there are several categories of temperament, and these came from these dimensions that were studied in those two lists we just talked about. There's an easy temperament, and the easy temperament adapts readily to new experiences, is generally cheerful, has regular patterns of eating and sleeping. There's a difficult temperament, and it does not respond well to new experiences or people. It's fussy and irritable, has irregular patterns of eating and sleeping. And there's the slow to warm up temperament, and that's characterized by low activity level and initial withdrawal from new experiences and people, gradually adjusting over time. So the slow to warm up is a child that would observe something and not respond right away. As to give an example. The book has a figure on this, and talking about the goodness of fit, the relationship between environmental forces and a predisposed temperamental behavior. So a child that has an EHD temperament, that has kind of warm, outgoing parents, then there's a goodness of fit there. The social influences, and we're going to talk in particular about the work of Mary Bowlby, Bowlby and also Mary Ainsworth, in terms of attachment, in attachment theory. And attachment is the enduring emotional bond that connects two people across time and space, and it's evolved for the sake of infant survival and development, is the evolutionary theory for this. Caregivers enable infants to learn how to be a member of their social group. The physical proximity keeps infants safe and offers security for confident exploration and contributes to an infant's self-regulation. And self-regulation is the ability to deliberately modulate one's behavior and emotion. So attachment has a number of different things about it, and primarily the work on attachment came from Bowlby, and she had the perspective that the process about attachment, about it being the process of social, emotional, and cognitive development that occurs in the context of caregiver-infant attachment. And her theory comes from there. She had worked originally with Harry Harlow, and later Mary Ainsworth worked with her. And the line of work on attachment really comes from first work with monkeys from Harlow, and then Bowlby and Ainsworth working with children and looking at different situations that they would set up. And I actually put a link to a video on the stranger situation that Mary Ainsworth used. So there's a brief video that shows you how that works out for that study on our Canvas page. So Bowlby talked about separation anxiety, and separation anxiety is a set of seeking and distress behaviors that occurs when the primary caregiver is removed from the immediate environment of the child. The term stranger anxiety refers to the distressed avoidance of a novel individual, and behaviors focus oftentimes on feeding. Feeding is reinforced. Attachment results from the positive reinforcement associated with feeding. And the ethological perspective comes from the work that Harry Harlow did with infant monkeys. He demonstrated that a soft mother, a terry cloth mother, was a significantly greater source of comfort than a food-providing mother that was made out of wire. And this suggests that attachment is a basic need and is necessary for survival. Mary Ainsworth's studies really kind of helped to classify and categorize things really well for us in psychology. And she created what she called the strange situation procedure. And that was used to elicit and observe attachment behavior. In the strange situation, it's a means of categorizing attachment styles consisting of a series of episodes where a mother and her child are observed together, separated, and then reunited in the presence of a stranger. And she looked at attachment behavior, and that's the behavior that promotes proximity or contact, such as approaching, following, and clinging in the older infant and in a toddler. So the types of attachment that Ainsworth came up with are secure attachment, insecure attachment, and disorganized or disoriented attachment. And the insecure attachment has two types as well. So let me go through each of these four from this chart, and this really summarizes it fairly nicely. The secure attachment is the majority of kids, and that's characterized by flexible proximity between parent and infant and a positive reunion behavior. And I do suggest you take a quick look at that YouTube video that I've linked on our Canvas page to get an idea of what this strange situation is like. It's fairly quick to go through. The insecure attachment includes the insecure avoidant attachment and the insecure resistant attachment. Insecure avoidant attachment is an insecure attachment where the infant shows little or no distress on separation from the parent, and avoidant behavior like running away from the parent when the parent returns to the room. Insecure resistant is an insecure attachment where the infant shows very high distress when separated and mixed reaction when reunited. And then the disorganized attachment is a type of insecure attachment characterized by inconsistent behavior on separation and reunion that shows no clear pattern. So what you see is really it's either secure attachment or insecure. And if it's insecure, then it falls into two types and a third one, which really doesn't get categorized very well. So over 2/3 of typically developing middle-class infants and toddlers are classified as securely attached. The percentages are lower or smaller numbers if in lower socioeconomic status samples. So families that have a low socioeconomic status have a lower percent that are securely attached. And that's believed to be based on the work of Maslow and Rogers that's probably may be related to the stresses on those families. Also the work of Nadine Burke-Harris talking about ACEs, it could be related to that as well. ACEs are adverse childhood events. And her TED Talk, Nadine Burke-Harris is the woman, she's the Surgeon General of California. She gave an excellent TED Talk on this about ACEs. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Event. And she showed that having more than 4 or more ACEs led to physical challenges throughout life. So sensitive caregivers consistently attend to the infant's cues, accurately interpret the meaning of the cues, and promptly and appropriately respond in a way that enhances the infant's trust. And the term synchrony refers to the reciprocal and mutually rewarding qualities of an infant caregiver attachment relationship. Research suggests fathers have slightly different patterns of attachment than mothers, and that this difference is associated with the gender of the child. Ainsworth made the observation in the 70s that when she had father-son, father-daughter, mother-son, mother-daughter, that fathers and mothers showed the same level of sensitivity to sons, and fathers were less sensitive than mothers were to the daughters. The attachment patterns are similar around the world. The majority, again, are secure attachment. The global sample is over 3/4. Green is Korea, blue is Japan, and lavender is the U.S. And the insecure resistant and insecure avoided numbers are there. So in terms of attachment and social-emotional outcomes, the positive outcomes of more harmonious parent-child relationship later on, more sociable with unfamiliar adults, and more likely to exhibit good emotional health. The negative outcomes are insecurity in infancy is a risk factor for behavioral problems. It's linked to anxiety disorders in adolescence, and less sociable than secure infants and less likely to exhibit self-confidence and social competence later on. In terms of gender, the influences on gender begin early in life. Gender is related to both biological and social factors, and gender is the social construct and expectation regarding what it means to be a male or female, and the factors interact in predictable and unpredictable ways to affect development. Gender differences refer to the cognitive and behavioral differences in males and females, and I want to point out that the terminology is changing now. We are in a period of change where when we're, instead of referring to gender as male or female, we're referring to it as male or female, or in putting other possibilities in there. And sometimes we simply say or other, because both for gender and for gender expression. And the result, anyway, so sex differences refer to clear biological differences that may be seen in different gendered people, and those refer to the anatomical and biochemical and hormonal differences. These are influenced by genetics, and they interact with social forces. So gender differences do start early. They start in the fetal period, about 2 months after conception and beyond. And in the fetal period, boys weigh more than girls and are more active than girls. So the activity level differences continue throughout childhood. Boys are more likely to die in childbirth than girls are, and they're more vulnerable to early illnesses. Girls seem to be more emotionally expressive and may be more attentive to social cues and exhibit more eye contact. So then we'll talk about emotional development for the baby, the first 2 years of life again. So emotion is the language of the infant. The only way that infants can communicate is with emotion, and that's often with their face emotion and the sounds that they make. We interpret those as an emotional response, and probably rightly interpret them in that regard. This emotion from the child affects attachment, and it's involved in most social interactions. The physical and cognitive associations with emotions and the emotion that's present at birth, that includes the social smile. And in infancy, the first facial expression of pleasure is a social smile. It's a primary emotion, and a primary emotion is one that is present early in life and is most likely innate. So from birth, infants express basic emotions. They have instinctive, general positive or negative emotions in response to environmental situations or states of need, such as hunger. From 2 to 3 months, there's an awakening sociability that leads to emotional complexity, and this has an increasing readiness for social interactions with caregivers. It promotes the emergence of the social smile, the infant's first facial expression of pleasure. And from about 6 months, memory aids emotion. So infants developing memories let them enjoy new games like peekaboo. And memory contributes to separation anxiety also at this time, because they remember what is now going. And then from 9 to 20 months is the emergence of secondary emotions. As infants develop the ability to stand and walk, they begin to display pride. It's an early secondary emotion. After 2 years, the emotional awareness explodes. Toddlers are aware of rules and morality. They're aware of the past, present, and future. And this lets them experience abstract emotions like disappointment if anticipations are not met, or guilt and shame as they anticipate punishment for breaking rules. Emotions like empathy and sympathy also become evident. Some key emotional milestones are appearance of separation anxiety around 6 months of age, emergence of secondary emotions, which is an emotion that emerges with the help of certain cognitive and social developments, guilt emotion, which is a painful feeling of regret that arises when one causes or is tied with causing and this is associated with a negative act that violates one's moral standards. Empathy is an emotional response to another emotional state that is similar to what other person is feeling or might be expected to feel. Infants develop an understanding of the communicative power of emotions. They have social referencing, which is reading the emotional cues of others. They have self-awareness, which is developing an understanding of themselves. And infants become increasingly socially active and interactive with their caregivers and others between 6 and 12 months of age. In distress, infants look to their primary caregiver's facial and vocal cues, which is a behavior called social referencing. So social referencing is using a caregiver's emotional cues to understand an uncertain or ambiguous event or stimulus. And some of you may have seen this happening with a little kid where something might happen and the child looks to the parent or caregiver, and if the parent or caregiver smiles and says, "Oh, what was that?" the child laughs. And if the parent or caregiver says, "Oh no, what happened?" the child cries. And this is social referencing. The child is learning how to respond. So for example, when a toddler just starts walking and they fall on their bum, they often will first look at the parent that was watching them walk. And the parents say, "Ooh, look at that, you fell." And the kid will laugh. Or they'll say, "Oh no, you fell, you okay?" And the kid will cry. So again, this is social referencing. It's really just learning what's the appropriate response. They don't know yet, so they're learning it. The attachment perspective on social referencing suggests infants look to their primary caregivers for emotional support and anxiety reduction. And the social referencing hypothesis suggests that infants look in an effort to understand the social situation and reduce ambiguity. Parents are aware of their infants' and toddlers' social referencing behavior, and parents use their emotional cues to send various messages, like a big smile to give you reassurance or a stern voice to give caution. And it's an important way for infants and toddlers to learn about their world. Infants are undifferentiated from their surrounding environment during the first months of life. Piaget believed that infants have no early awareness of themselves as separate beings, and that in fact they believed that everything was an extension of themselves. Researchers suggest that self-awareness does not exist until the second year of life, when language and cognitive complexity have developed. And there's an increasing awareness of oneself as separate from their parents. It is, in fact, self-awareness, and this is essential in the development of one's attachment relationships. These relationships continue to play a critical role in early childhood development and beyond. And that's the end of chapter 4.